In early 1995, the century-old Stacy Mansion stood with a weather-worn exterior, facing an uncertain fate. The picturesque three-story Queen Anne Victorian sat on nearly an acre of valuable land in the heart of Glen Ellen. In addition to its impressive architectural features, the mansion held historic interest for many. Built in 1892 by Philo Stacy, son of one of the first settlers to the area and a prominent citizen of the community, it represented a visible and symbolic link to the past. 100 years later, the mansion languished on the market with little interest from private buyers. Now the mansion and coach house were on the sale block again, and preservation of the Grande Dame of Main Street was in doubt.
The criteria and used to determine whether or not a historic structure is worth preserving is a very important question for consideration, because a lot of people are under the impression today that just because a building is old or early, it must be valuable, and that's not true. Not every early house can or should be saved. But I think you have to evaluate a house from an architectural viewpoint, and sometimes it doesn't have any great architectural merit, but it's very important historically to the local community.
I think everything about the house should really be saved and preserved. It typifies a Queen Anne Victorian. At the time it was built, no expense was spared. The windows are magnificent. It has all the architectural details. It's a textbook Queen Anne. Secondly, it figures so heavily in the history of Glen Ellen. Philo Stacy was a very, very prominent Glen Ellenite for years and years, and his father was one of the founders of the community, or early settlers of the community. I was very excited when the Park District approached us and considered turning the home into a facility. Unfortunately, there was a public hearing, and the community's response to that suggestion was positively negative. That was something they did not want done for many reasons: tax dollar, fear of traffic. So I was very disappointed when that fell through, because the house is very significant. It's part of Glen Ellen's history, and I certainly didn't want it razed, but to have it turned into a museum would have been the ideal situation.
Here was a proposal that could save the old mansion and the property, and that some big bad developer didn't move in with the bulldozers and tear down Glen Ellen's finest history. The intent was going to be for it to become a community center in our neighborhood. The volume of traffic was a tremendous issue. This was not an area that really had ever been designed or developed for a major park district facilities. And it was a tough decision, because we were risking the possibility that if the Park District did not purchase the Stacy Mansion and turn it into a Park District facility, then on the opposite extreme would be a developer coming in and tearing down the mansion, and all of a sudden you have 4 very large out-of-place homes in the neighborhood. And as difficult and as horrifying as that might be, it was my feeling, along with many others, that that was a better option than a Park District facility in the neighborhood.
I first became interested in the Stacy Mansion while looking for a lot for a family who wanted me to build here in Glen Ellen. Although the lot was ideal, the home itself sat squarely in the middle of the 1-acre site. I then contacted the Divers with a proposal to both purchase, subdivide, and move the Stacy home. This is a magnificent Queen Anne with many unusual architectural features, and I was only interested in the project if the home could be saved by its relocation. I was not interested in a solution that required the demolition of the home.
The Stacy house definitely could not have been moved off the site. It's just way too big to fit down any streets that are even around the area here. Not to mention the trees and the wires that would have to be trimmed. In my opinion, I mean, it's either it get moved on site or it would have been probably in a landfill, I guess.
When I heard that the mansion was going to be moved, I guess my first reaction was one of sheer terror. This is really a landmark piece of property, and of course one of the most important historic sites in the village. The wonderful view shed and looking at 200-year-old oak trees and seeing this mansion situated in the center with the Port Cochere off to one side. I could visualize the coaches pulling up there. I've thought about that many times. But then I heard about Greg Gitz's plan to relocate the house, and I'm thinking, you know, we could have lost this wonderful historic site and house totally. So I became very enthusiastic and said to myself, I've got to support this because number one on the list is saving this very valuable building. It may sound real cornballish, but it's almost sort of like our Mount Vernon because all of our history began here.
In 1835, Philo's father, Moses Stacy, settled in the area where he built an inn along the stagecoach route between Chicago and Galena. The small settlement grew quickly until the 1850s, when the railroad came through, refocusing growth along the rail line. Stacy was married in 1853 to his first wife, Betsy Taylor, the daughter of a Baptist minister. He and Betsy had 3 children, Carrie, Fanny, and Warren. Carrie was the eldest and the only surviving heir to the Stacy estate. After his mother's death in 1889, Stacy inherited the land on which he built his mansion. During his lifetime, Philo Stacy was variously a farmer, civil servant, road builder, and prosperous landowner. By 1874, he had acquired 300 acres of farmland through his own dealings. Upon the death of his mother, 15 years later, he inherited valuable land near the village limits. In 1891, Stacy sold a large portion of his land to developers for $20,000, using half of the proceeds to build the mansion. The mansion was his dream, and for him represented the transition from farmer to gentleman. The young community grew quickly as families moved to the picturesque village by the lake. Stacy emerged as a prominent resident and earned a reputation as being outgoing and impulsive. He was considered by some as the official greeter in town, and on occasion would present flowers to the ladies as they got off the train.
Philo was an active citizen in the growing community and valued the respect of his fellow citizens. In a purported autobiographical sketch, Philo wrote of himself, "Mr. Stacy has always been active in furthering the interests of the community and is recognized as a man of affairs, enjoying the respect and goodwill of his fellows."
Stacy enlisted as a private in the Civil War, and his membership in the GAR was a great source of pride for him, so much that he once hosted a reunion for 2,000 of his fellow soldiers and their families.
The grove was festooned with red, white, and blue bunting, and tables for over 2,000 people were set. Ada Harmon, in her book, The Story of an Old Town, Glen Ellen, recounts Mr. Stacy was in his element in an affair of this sort. He was here, there, and everywhere, greeting his old comrades from the Civil War and extending to them a welcome they would never forget. The banquet was followed by storytelling and music and reminiscences of all sorts. Ada Harmon went on to describe that they had a very unique form of entertainment in a tightrope walker there, but unfortunately he, as she said, lost his presence of mind and suffered a fatal accident.
Because of his experience in construction, Stacy was the supervisor for an innovative plan damming the springs which created Lake Ellen. Later, he was involved in 2 lawsuits against the same Glen Ellen Hotel and Springs Company, the group of investors responsible for the development of the elegant hotel and spa adjacent to the lake. In 1894, Stacy brought a suit claiming that he had not been paid a salary for his services as superintendent of the grounds. He won the suit. However, when the judgment remained unpaid, he took it upon himself to exact payment in the form of furniture, which he and the sheriff appropriated from the hotel lobby. 10 years later, Stacy sued them again, this time to prevent the privatization of the hotel grounds in Springs, claiming that the owners had promised to dedicate the park and lake to the community. The case advanced to the Illinois Supreme Court, where he ultimately lost because there was no public record of the dedication. Of the 116 acres that originally formed the property, only 25 remain today. Stacy married for the second time at age 74 to Josephine Kephart, a widow of his daughter's age. According to court records, Josephine claimed that Stacy's daughter was openly antagonistic towards her, accusing Josephine of marrying her father for his money. Josephine also alleged that Stacy physically abused her. After living with him for less than 2 years, Josephine was granted a divorce and a cash settlement of $6,000. Stacy's funeral was private at his daughter's request. A newspaper reporter wrote that no one was permitted to attend church, much to the sorrow and indignation of the village. Old soldiers who came from out of town and found they could not be admitted sat down on the edge of the sidewalk and wept.